And here we go. So, good evening to all of you, and those of you who come in later to the recording. This will be recorded, and I will upload it tonight to my YouTube channel. So, I hope you noticed when you came in that I do have the slides there for you to download. And also, I have two Huffington Post articles that Otto Scharmer put in there. He does a lot, a blog and a lot of articles in the Huffington Post. And I do want you to look at those, but I do want to put a disclaimer to both of those. I'm not promoting a political point of view or anything, because they are looking at the Trump administration and what's going on in the world with the whole issue around globalism versus nationalism. But what I think is important about these two articles is that you will see how he puts a lot of the Theory U material into action and to think about it. And next week, when you come into week 8, I'm going to have a short 7-minute video where he is at the World Economic Institute meeting that just took place, and he was on a panel that Tom Friedman from the New York Times was hosting. And Otto really lays out, I think, in a 7-minute talk, basically what all of this Theory U is about and why it's important for leadership to begin to understand it. So you will see that. So, but I just, want to make sure that I'm not throwing out a political agenda with this, but I just wanted you to see two articles that I think are kind of interesting to get us to think about what's going on and maybe some ways on how we can break through the bubbles that are out there. So tonight, as I said, I'm going to take you through this concept of presencing and absencing and look at the conversation component. And I'm hoping as you look at this and watch this, that you think about what is going on in your interviews, whether you've completed the interview or you're going to be doing the interview, to look at what is being stated here as a way to think about getting the person who you're interviewing to get into a deeper level. So that is our agenda for tonight. And as I go along here, again, at any time, just interrupt me, scream out, say, hey, I need a question or some clarification. Please feel free at any time to do that. So what we're going to do is, and you've read through this and we've looked at this quite a bit, is that when we look at the social field of presencing, again, those areas of open mind, open heart, and open will are very important. And as you go down the U, suspending and seeing is a very important component. But as we look at those two, and I want you to think about seeing, that really, again, what you begin to look at as a person who's seeing is that your perception has become more accurate. You're looking out the window and you're gathering facts. You're gathering information. You're gathering information about the reality that your organization, your school, or your business or whatever it might be is facing. And then as you begin to look at this, moving away from downloading, and we're going to talk about downloading a little bit more later on, is that really when you're seeing, and again, think about this during your interviewing, you're asking or trying to clarify questions and intent. You're trying to understand that. You're trying to get a handle on that. And you also, by seeing and looking at things, are moving into the context that matter. So you're not just coming from your own point of view, but you're really beginning to look at what the context is of what you're seeing or what the reality is. And that the important thing here is to suspend judgment and connect to wonder, trying to understand. So again, when you think about the interview process that you're going through or you've done, the question is, how easy was it for you to suspend the judgment in order to really begin to hear what that person is saying? So that's what sensing is about, or not sensing, but seeing is about. And it's this ability to get accurate information. And again, we're being confronted with some interesting issues around that concept, within our own society about what is accurate, what is real, what is fake, etc. So we're actually living in an interesting time to think about the left side of the U. But again, I want to just make sure that you get a handle on this is what seeing means. And the way in which you do that is that you ask clarifying types of questions. So with that then, after you look at suspending your own assumptions and seeing, then you begin to develop the empathetic approach to things. You begin to redirect. You begin this development of sensing, and so the sensing then is really defined as perceptions begin to happen from the whole field. So now what begins to happen is you really move from inside your head to outside the organizational boundaries. You begin to explore, you begin to broaden your field and your perceptions and your reference points. So the principles that underlie sensing then are changing the container, meaning that if you're a classroom teacher, I begin to understand the environment in which my kids are coming from and how it interfaces with that environment of a classroom. It's a good way of beginning to sense where my students are coming from. And then you begin to do a deep dive into looking at the total field, the total picture of maybe an individual student who's having a problem, to look beyond the classroom, to look beyond just getting the content, but beginning to understand what drives that individual. And then what you're attempting to do here is to redirect attending, trying to find other different ways of really beginning to understand that individual, beginning to become empathetic towards that individual, because there you're opening up your heart. You're beginning to go into their shoes to understand their point of view. So again, this is a good way of thinking about what the sensing process is. And as an interviewer and as a researcher, this becomes an extremely important tool for you to understand. And hopefully, as you're doing your interviews, you're getting a sense of what this means as you explore it. Some of you might be highly successful with it. Some of you might be running into your own downloading. Some of you might even having trouble of creating the space or the container so that the person who you're interviewing is actually feeling comfortable to open up. But again, this is what going down to you about. This is what open heart is all about. And then finally, in relationship to that, is this concept of open will is really where you let go. And letting go is that ability that there's a generative field that begins to emerge, whether it's with the person who you're interviewing, whether it's with the group that you're working with. Because as Sharma looks at it from this point of view, what you're letting go is your small s self. How you function in the present with your downloading, all those particular points, to allow then to let come is this emerging self. So that's the capital S. So that interaction of finding out, first of all, right now when you started out in this course or you started out in this program, you had a lot of different assumptions. You're probably functioning from the small s of self. But as you have gone through some of the courses, particularly 800, 845 now, as you begin to explore the source of your own leadership, what I'm hoping will begin to emerge, both individually, but collectively within your teams as you interact, is this emergence of a new possibility of self as a leader. So that's what the social field of presencing is about. And when you look at it from this point of view, is that then the perceptions begin to happen from the source of the future. I begin to look at the possibilities of what might I, or what collectively within your organization, we can really bring into reality. And that when you reach this level of really experiencing this, and if you think about, have you ever been on a team that's really motivated you, and that all of a sudden there's this kind of this field emerges that everyone within that team just gets the sense of possibility, that it can move forward, it can try new types of ideas. So that is what the concept of presencing is about. And as it says, you know, as he points out from this, is that really what begins to happen is that there's these boundaries begin to collapse, that the present of the past, the current reality, begins to dissipate, and that the presence of the future begins to emerge, and that the presence of one's authentic self of, wow, this is basically what I can do, this is collectively what we can do together. And so that, in essence, is really as what you're doing as you go down the U. And as you've been reading in the book, particularly the social field, that section on chapter 15, which talks about the grammar of the social field, this really is what this is all about. And again, you think about it from an intellectual point of view, you know, these are words, they fit into your head. But what you now need to begin to do is begin to play with, what does this mean in reality? And so your interviewing process and the activity I have you doing there is an attempt to get you to begin to experience those three areas of going down the U. Now, let me just stop right now and see if you have any thoughts about this, any comments about it, you know, or need any clarification about it. Because these are extremely important parts of understanding the concept of presencing.
So I have a question. This is Sherry.
Okay.
So if I apply this to my interview, so I'm really thrilled with the interview I did today. I think I got the person to go extremely deep. But if we were to say, so clearly, like, what would be an example in an interview to know that you were in the presencing, for example? Like, what would be an example of that?
Well, the way I'd look at that is, and that's difficult to put into concrete words, but I'll attempt to do it. So, for example, when you're in have you ever been in a conversation with a person that you literally lost the sense of time?
Yes, so that happened today.
Yeah.
We did an hour and a half, and
okay.
it was supposed to be 30 minutes.
Right, and tell me, as you reflect upon that, why do you think that happened to you and to that individual?
I think he really liked the questions I asked him, to the point where I got him to maybe think about things that he hadn't thought of in a new way. And he just went on and got very personal about his family. And I think he just really enjoyed the experience.
Because let me ask you, do you feel that you created a safe space for this individual to begin to open up about who they are in a non-traditional interview approach?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was talking about retirement and everything.
Okay. So
his fears, who he'll be when he doesn't have the company anymore, identity crisis, everything.
Okay, so that's it. There it is. That's the example.
Okay. I wanted to see if I was there. I think I was there, but.
Yeah, and again, and hopefully when you go through, putting this together, whether you write it up or do it as a media presentation or however you're going to do it, that's what, I want you to go back and then reflect upon yourself about what was going on there as an interview besides that individual. So for all of you, that's important. Now, some of you might have been able to reach that. Others might not have, because again, it's how the field emerges. And that's the best way of saying it, because it again can become frustrating to an interviewer to one extent, because for whatever reason, either yourself or the other individual, that field did not emerge for whatever it is. But when it does, what begins to happen is that the sense of time begins to dissipate, and that there is a genuine flow that begins to emerge, and that really your questions that you originally started out with begin to dissipate, and the field takes you into a different direction. So I think that's something, that I think is very important. I think this is extremely important as developing leaders for yourself personally and professionally, and also it will have impact for you as a researcher. Now, that's part of the dissertation process, doing the research, but to me, the more important thing right now is, how does this help you to become I'm going to say, an emerging leader? I don't want to use the word better leader. I don't want to put a value on it, but how does it help you to understand, to create the types of fields that allow both your possibilities to emerge and another person's or a group's possibilities to emerge? So I hope that helps. And
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and it does, and I'm telling you, this is something, you just don't pick this book up and do this. I mean, it takes, I don't know if any of you are in psychology or in counseling or anything, it takes time to nurture this type of development. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, I've been at it for a very, very long time. And at times I'm a neophyte still when you think about it, because of the nature of creating and attempting to create both within myself, but also within others around me. So I think that's the lesson I'm hoping that you'll be able to take away with using the framework of Theory U. Okay? Any other comments or thoughts right now before I move on?
Yes, I have one, Dr. Gould. This
Yeah.
is Patty. Like Sherry, I thought that my interview went very well. We were an hour and a half in, and I only left because we both had other commitments. I mean, we had such a good dialogue going that we could have talked all day. And maybe 10 minutes into it, my questions, I did sort of throw them out because we springboarded into other areas. But I chose this leader because she seemed like such a phenomenal leader, and I think we were very aligned in our philosophies, our ideologies, and I found that out through the interview. So I guess I walked away wondering, if it probably wouldn't have gone so well, perhaps if we hadn't been so matched ideologically and what we wanted to see happen with the school district. So I guess I'm not sure if it's so much what I did, but the nature of who she was and her personality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And again, so what I'd ask you is do you feel that why you're able to shift away was that you got into an interesting flow in the conversation that I'm going to say she took you in a direction and you followed it?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And that's it. Now, the question is, so what happens if you begin to talk to someone who is in a different ideological bent than you are? Well, okay, that's, we'll look at that towards the end. So the question then is, and I think that's the essential question that we're all faced with today, is how do we cross the boundaries to get into generative conversation with people who have a totally different point of view that we have. So that's part of it. I'll just do this real quick. So I can relate to you that I walked in a week ago into a barbershop. As you can see, I had a lot of hair to get cut. But I walked into a barbershop, and there's another gentleman sitting in the barber's chair. And I sat down, and, I was actually looking at my iPhone and, looking at stuff. And then I looked up, and then there's a Trump-Pence sign hanging up there. And behind me, there was a Pittsburgh Steelers sign and some other things. And then the conversation, this was interesting. So, and I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about of different ideologies. So the conversation was going on between the barber and the gentleman who was in the chair. And the barber had a Southern drawl. So, and I found out that he was from Alabama. And they were talking about, the barber was talking about diabetes in his family. And the guy in the chair says, oh, that's hereditary, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden the barber says, no, because I'm not going to get it, because I will not to get it, because Jesus taught me how not to get it. But my sister, who doesn't believe in that, she got it. And then the guy in the chair is there like, yeah, I'm sorry. Again, that's all a bunch of crap, and I'm there like, oh God, here we go. And so they're talking about this. And then he finishes cutting the guy's hair. And then the guy gets up and looks at me and says, boy, I really primed him for you, didn't I? So I get in a chair, and it was interesting. And the barber says, yeah, so you see what happened? I said, yeah. I said, well, I'm going to tell you something right off the bat. The only sign in here that I agree with is the Pittsburgh Steelers sign. And so then we started talking about it. And then he started talking to me about how he's lost customers because he has that Trump-Pence sign. And then I said to him, well, you got free expression. It's okay. I saw it there. I don't necessarily agree with them. And we got into an interesting conversation. I'm going to stop at that point. And it was interesting because we come from totally different points of view, but we're able to get the conversation to a point where we could listen to each other's view. So I don't know if that helps you, but I walked out of there, and I'm sure when I left there, we had a good conversation. Next time I go into a barbershop, we can probably continue to talk as human beings. So I don't know if that helps you to understand that, yeah, you can talk to people who have different ideological bents or different points of view. But again, it's your awareness as the individual of the stuff that enables you to do this. Does that help you?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. So I think that's part of the process, and it's probably, and one of the reasons I gave you those 2 articles to look at, if you so desire, is that, yeah, we need to start having these conversations beyond, the bubble. We'll use it that way, whether it's Democrat, Republican, or liberal, conservative. We need to get to this level of presencing to see possibilities and how we overcome these things. Now, again, that's on the social presencing side of the you. Because then what we now need to really begin to talk about is okay, what are the enemies of the you? And so when you look at this side, and we're going to talk about this in the next 2 weeks, about going up the side of the U, and then when you get into 845, you're going to play with building stuff, going up the side of the U, utilizing prototyping. But again, if you remember, so the enemies, that first one is the voice of judgment. And again, as you are doing your interviews, and if you haven't done your interviews, again, as I said to you, it's critical not to allow your judgments to come into play. You got to limit those. So you have to stop that, because if you don't, then you're not going to see, you're not going to hear what the other individual is saying. The other one then is that voice of cynicism, which comes out of the open heart. And what that means is that you get there's emotions of disconnection. There's arrogance. There's, when you look at the last election, you really saw that where analysts were talking about the sophisticated urbanite versus the rural individual. Then that comes out of arrogance. And then there's cynicism, and there's callousness, etc. So you have to be careful of that voice of judgment. And then the last one, obviously, is what he calls is that voice of fear. Fear of letting go. The fear of, now as I'm thinking about this, of me to sit in that barber's chair there, even though he had a shaving knife to my neck, and we made a joke about that while he was talking about that. But, okay, it's good to, all right, let's have a conversation, see where it goes. So again, these three enemies are something that you have to be aware of inside of yourself at first, because I'm sure if you think within your organization, whether it be a school district or a school building, wherever you're working, is that that when you get conversations within groups, you probably see all three of these emerge all the time in terms of conversation. So any comments, points, questions, thoughts about that?
Okay, this is Sherry. I have another one then.
Okay.
I wanted to wait and make sure I'm not talking too much.
Okay, well, this is the Sherry hour. That's okay.
So I found myself during the interview, I feel at one point he was almost looking for my acknowledgement of how much that was, did I answer it, enough, or did I give enough information? And I actually fought myself to not say, oh, that's great, or that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Because I felt that could come across as now I'm almost guiding him to what I want to hear versus what he wants to share. So I left many awkward silences.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's great, because what happens is, and what he's telling you, what's he telling you?
Well, I think he was looking for approval at one point.
Yeah.
And I think he was also thinking so one of the questions I asked him, for example, was, what does success mean to you?
Okay.
Personally, professionally, don't hold back. He even let me record him, which was amazing. And I said to him, this is a safe space. It's not going anywhere, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And that's where I first felt I penetrated and got beyond the work boundary into the personal boundary and his, things that mentally have challenged him over the years, and he just kept going and going.
Yeah. Okay.
So he at the end of that, he asked me, how was that? I go, that's your answer, and I just want to hear your thoughts.
and when a person says that, one of the things you can say is, well, you tell me.
Yeah.
Because
what sharing.
Yeah. Okay. Because what happens is the person that you're interviewing. So all of you probably did this, or you're going to do this. Is say, okay, I got to do this interview for the class. Blah blah blah. And the whole bit. And what do you think's going on in that person's mind? Okay, we're going to do an interview. And generally, you do an interview, so you answer the questions based upon what I think you want me to say. That's normal. That's the typical downloading. So if you've gone for a job interview, normally you try to answer the question probably thinking, am I answering what they want to hear? So that's what, that's what you got to break through. If you want to get to the generative conversation, if you want to get to open heart, if you want to get to sensing, to allow the emergence of that field, you have to allow the individual who's telling their story to begin to let go of the old assumptions of what interviewing is about, to allow their voice to emerge. And then your job, to one extent, is to encourage that to emerge. That's what this stuff does for you.
Thank you. That was really, really helpful.
Okay?
I feel like now I have a kinship with this picture. He gave me a hug and kissed me on the cheek after the interview. I'm like, thank you so much. This was great. And he hugged me, and it was really nice. I mean,
Yeah. Well, that, because maybe for the first time, an assumption might be, is that this person felt that another human being really listened to me.
yeah. Yeah.
That's what that's about. And when a person does that, think about, now, is that your boss, did you say?
No, it's not.
Okay. So this is someone who's outside of the realm of leading you, or you're involved with, that organization?
He's part of a program that I am part of, but he is not my direct boss. So I don't report to him, but I've worked with him in the past, and I loved his style.
Okay.
So that's why I chose him.
But it probably has changed the relationship between both of you because of that.
Absolutely.
Which allows them for somebody from different types of possible futures in terms of working through projects or whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
See,
absolutely. I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel I know him so much more now, and so many different sides of him.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. That's what you want to get to in all of you within an organization, whether you're the leader of that organization or not. That's what you're attempting to do. You're trying to create the space that we get away from just the downloading and being polite and saying things that are politically correct, but to get on the debate level of trying to force your point of view, but get to inquiry, to get to a point where we all feel secure enough to share our point of view in order to find a new direction of where we might want to go. So there's two things going on that I have you doing. One, I have you doing this to kind of start learning how to interview at that level, because it's going to be important when you do, particularly do not quantitative, but qualitative research. But more importantly is, how do you interact with your colleagues? Whether you are online with them, or you're subordinate to them, or you are, the leader of them. The way you create an environment that encourages the possibilities of a collective emergence of new futures, you got to do this stuff right here. And what's interesting about that video I told you about, where Otto's being interviewed by Tom Friedman, is this is what he's saying to world leaders at the World Economic Forum. He said, that's the type of leadership we need to develop this today because of the complexity of the issues that we're dealing with. Okay? So, again, as you think this stuff through and you do this at any time, at any time, feel free, to email me, contact me, text me, or whatever, about your thinking about this, because this is a different way of thinking about leadership, but to me, it's one of the most critical areas that we have to look at. Now we're going to bring in this, I was going to say this dirty word, downloading, because what we're going to look at then is really what downloading is all about is acting from my point of view, or the organizational point of view. And it comes from looking at, first of all, the mental models, basically, our mental processes that are guided by our habitual patterns. So if you remember in 800, if we talked about Chris Martin, the ladder of inference, that's what this is about. Or if you think about the iceberg, these are the mental models that drive our action. And then what happens then, from our own points of view, then there's organizational boundaries, the meetings and the habitual conversations that we have. And so what you begin to, what downloading does is here's how it stops learning and change to take place. So first of all is, you're not recognizing what you see, because you're not looking at reality. You're looking at it through your lens and your perception without looking at it from the point of view of what's real, what's out there. You're not saying what you think because you get held back in doing that because there's certain norms that say you don't say that around here, or you're not allowed to say that because you're fearful that if you say something, you're going to get slapped down or you can lose your job, or not doing what you say. So again, the idea is that actions speak louder than words. So we might preach, we believe this, da, 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 but you don't do it. And then not seeing what you do. So you don't get any feedback on your actions and what's going on. So the tendency is when you're downloading is you just do your habitual patterns of behavior and actions continuously without even being aware of them. Okay? So that's what downloading is when you begin to think about it. And what I'd like you to do is think about your own organizations, your own, whether it's in K-12 or whether it's in an NGO or it's in a higher education. Think about meetings that you have gone to and the actions that either your particular division or department is doing, and see if this is some of the normal patterns of behavior that take place. And if it is, you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to keep doing the same old, same old. So this is, I think, important for you to understand this. And again, you do have these slides available for you, to look at this. So this is what downloading is. But what it does now is it moves into really the technologies. And so what Sharma talks about is actually the opposite of presencing then is this social field of absencing. It's leading to fundamentalism. And so what happens then in this process, as you begin to do this, is instead of having open mind, you basically get stuck in one truth, one point of view. And particularly when you look at, let me put my glasses on so I'll make sure I get this right for you. So when you look at that section that deals with the concepts of the different grammars of the social field, really he points out that absencing means that we shut down our capacity to relate to the future that wants to emerge in all of us. And so what happens is with denying, and again, this is why I gave you those two articles, that this denying leads then to this concept really of desensitizing. And what desensitizing is all about means that our senses don't allow us to move into new fields into someone else's skin. So we get stuck inside the boundaries of our current individual or collective body. And so really what starts to happen here is it becomes us and them. So again, look at the political environment that we're in right now. Look at the concept of national security. Look at immigration. Look at all of these different types of concepts that are emerging within our society right now. Not just in our society, it's worldwide, which comes about because of a divide, major divide between globalism and nationalism. And that's what you'll read about in that one article that he talks about. So again, absencing then is that we get stuck in our own point of view, our own will. And we're caught there. And then what we end up doing is we begin to demonize other people or other groups of people. We begin to manipulate information. And then we end up diluting and abusing, different types of groups. We abort, we disembody people. And then what we end up doing basically is destroying them. Not us, them. And so when you look at, and if you go back into your Theory U book on page 244 and 245, where he talks about what fundamentalism is that he looks at it from the point of view that when you're not seeing So again, denying that what's going on is you have a rigid adherence to certain beliefs and principles. So you get stuck in one language or one truth. So, all immigrants are bad, or all homeless people, that God is punishing them because they didn't stand up and do what they're supposed to do. Or when you look at dissensing, it's an intolerance of or a lack of empathy for other views. So you get stuck in this collective skin. What happens there? And then again, the absencing, what that does is instead of allowing for possibilities, we close off possibilities. And so he says, if you want to look at fundamentalism in terms of it from a world point of view, really you see it in religion, you see it in politics, and you see it in the economy. And if you go back to, remember the three divides that we talked about, us to nature, us to others, and us to self, really what begins to happen is with the dispensing side of this thing. So from a religious point of view, what you begin to see is that I am, or our group is chosen. We are the chosen ones, and that other people are infidels. They don't buy into that. Now think about that in terms of just the world religious concepts that go on. Go back into history. Think about the purpose of the Crusades, or think about what's going on in the Muslim world, particularly the radical Muslim world, in terms of fatwas and this attack and wiping out the infidel. So that's a form of absencing. It's not based on possibilities. It's based on we're stuck in our truth and our point of view. So from a political point of view, is that really what you start looking at there is those who resist the laws of history, will be annihilated. Those that don't buy into our point of view should be subjugated or put down. That's what you hear. And throughout history, you've seen these types of historical points of view. And he points out, particularly with Nazism, that article, or not that article, but in that chapter where he talks about Hitler's secretary. Very, very interesting looking at what this was all about and what happened to her later on in life as she began to think about what she was part of as she went along. And then when you look at economics, the sensitizing, have-nots at the bottom of the pyramid are victims by the structures and policies designated from people at the top. So right now, we're dealing with income disparity even within our country. What's going on, people at the top, the data shows that the very small group of wealthy people are becoming more and more wealthy at the expense of other people. So we get into the politics of taxation, we get into all of these things. Again, these are the symptoms of a particular point of view, of fundamentalistic point of views. And then finally, when you look at the destruction and violence, well, we know what happens, from a religious point of view. History shows that you had the Crusades, you had the witches at Salem being burnt. You go through history and see how fundamentalism plays out there. Political points of view, basically direct structural violence, discrimination, and annihilation of minorities. So you can see our history, you can see histories of the world of what happened to indigenous people, of what happened to minority people. If you remember, those of you remember the Vietnam War, what happened in Laos and Cambodia, Pol Pot and people like that, genocide, look at genocide in Africa. These are all examples of fundamentalism that is really, it destroys the possibility of the future. And then finally, what you see is really the structural violence of people living and dying in daily misery from an economic point of view. So again, this gives you a contrast to think about this. Hey, yeah, it's really nice to go down to you and, open heart, open will, but then let's deal with some realities that are opposite of presencing. and it's absencing. And I'm sure you can look at things that are happening around us, but in organizations you find the same type of processes that take place where people get shunned, they get pushed out, there's political intrigue, all those things. So I wanted to make sure that you have a sense of the opposite of presencing and what it's about, your ability to read about this. That's why I gave you those 2 articles, if you choose to read them, about the present political situation in the United States. But again, I go back to my barber situation, is that it was funny. I was very conscious of this after listening to that one gentleman, berating the barber, and then, then just saying, hey, I'm going to try to get in a conversation with this guy. And it was kind of interesting because, he talked about living in Alabama in the 60s and all those Northerners coming down there. Well, we had a way of, he said this to me, we had a way of taking care of this, maybe not him, but he said the KKK took care of itself. And I'm there, wow, that's interesting. So it's important to understand and how to get people to even begin to talk about these in order to move into the possibility of presencing. So let me stop there and see any comments or questions or thoughts about this. Or I can ask you another way of looking at it, does this help to kind of look at a way of looking at current reality at the macro level and possibly the micro level, but the macro level of what's going on in the world today versus the possibilities of presencing? How do you see this, or at least your initial thoughts about this and what you've read in the chapters?
Dr. Gould?
Yeah.
I think it, maybe not so much in the reading, but the one article that you put up online
Yeah.
about the traits of bad leaders.
Yeah.
This kind of falls in with some of that, I think. A lot of it, not even just a little.
Yeah.
I thought that the one article, I forget what the title of it was, but it said the one CEO could go into a meeting and just suck the life out of the room. Was really, because I've known a lot of people like that, not just bosses, but other people you have to work with.
Yeah.
And they can be that way, and they just exhibit a lot of these, diluting and aborting and denying whatever a lot of them.
And those people that you've interacted that you might see that way or you've seen that, tell me something about how they perceive people within an organization.
They're kind of, like you said, what you said, they're stuck in one truth. They expect everyone to see things their way.
Yeah.
Just, that's it. And I kind of call them, excuse my expression, I call them the professional bitch and moaners.
Yeah, okay.
They complain about everything.
Okay. And then what happens to people over time because of that type of leadership?
It wears you down.
Yeah, okay.
It just, it burns you out, whatever you're doing.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Yeah. That is what it happens. I mean, it really does.
And burnout could even be, you could say that, that's part of the destroying part.
Yep.
You get to that end there.
Yep. Sure is. Because you totally give up and you just do it for the sake of doing, because either you can't leave because of your own economic condition, putting it that way, or you just get deadened to it and just do what you do, and hey, that's the way we always do it. That's the way he is or she is, and you just live with it and go home. But the problem that we have to look at is how this, like for example, and I just say, this whole debate in this country right now around what's real and what's not is really interesting when you think about it. Because one of the things you do in denying and then desensitizing is to challenge what's out there. You know, our point of view is what's right. So again, let's look at, and I'm going to just do this. Let's look at Trump in relationship to how, now whether you believe the media is doing stuff or not, but remember, the media, most presidents hate the media. Obama hated the media, Jack Kennedy hated the media, but what's happening though, what's kind of interesting is, as you say this, is that there's this attempt to create a desensitizing towards the media, and particularly the last comment that the media is the enemy of the American people. Now just think about that in relationship to this inverted U. What's that lead to after a while? And that's constantly blurted out there, that all news that you're reading is fake, that reality is alternative. And they've even wanted, you know, who was it? Kellyanne Conway made that crazy statement. Well, there's alternative realities. It's like, oh, are you a physicist? So there must be alternative universes. So that's what we're looking at right now, and it does. I think what's going to happen is, and you're already hearing people talking about this, is that it's going to wear people down to the point where they're not going to care anymore. And who cares? Just like you just said about those types of leaders. That's danger. So this gives you something really, you know, to begin to think about in light of where we are. But more importantly to you as a leader, what I'm more concerned about is not, you know, the broader, you know, national issues or global issues right now. But again, you know, think about this in terms of your own organization. If you're a classroom teacher, think about the nature of your building. You know, is it more towards attempting to do social presencing, or is there a sense of absencing, you know, going on within that? You know, that's a way of beginning to understand what's happening in relationship to this. And the other thing is, I'm looking at this, thinking about kids. Think about kids in relationship to their learning and how they react to learning environments, and how we nurture the development of curiosity within them, as opposed to, you know, trying, you know, to control the environment to a point of view that there's one way of doing it and it's the only way of doing it, etc. Does that set a tone that leads us into thinking about, you know, different approaches to what learning's about, the structure of schooling, etc. So it gives us, you know, some interesting, you know, a different framework to think about how we set up our environments and how we interact with people, whether it be professionals, you know, adults to adults, adults to kids, kids to kids. So any thoughts, comments?
What comes to mind for me is if there, so in my organization, I could clearly point out somebody who's absencing and destroying their whole team. But I think the challenge that this got me thinking about was, how can I start to engage with this leader and start to maybe help them move the opposite way of the curve? How can I kind of get beneath why they're doing this? Maybe they're fear for their own job. Maybe they just want to step on everybody to continue to move up. We'll try to get into what that is and help them become more self-aware. It's difficult to do, but it almost challenges me what's the best way to do this.
Cool. Yeah, you got it.
Sense?
Yeah, you got it. That's exactly what it's about. You know,
or do I go to another leader who could possibly have more impact on this person? Again, treading lightly, doing it in the appropriate way, a careful way.
Yep.
It's really got me to think about some situations in my company.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's exactly what you do, because the only way you're going to do it, and again, I'm going to go back. It's almost like me sitting down with that barber. I could have really gotten in. I could have literally gotten up and left because I don't buy into that point of view. But we honestly, dead seriously, we got into a good conversation, even to the point where he said, Hillary's a criminal. And I said, no, she's not. I said, that's not true. He actually listened as he and I talked about those types of things. So, that I think, maybe it's a small example, but that's what we got to do. The other question I'd ask you is, and again, if you're interviewing a person and think about it, or a conversation, is try to understand how they became a leader to end up being this way. What role models did they have? What points of view? Did something happen that really shocked them into a way that they believe this is the only way to act? See, those are the types of questions you can start asking people. And the more you become known within your organization as a person to ask those questions, I think that bodes well for you as a leader, because what it will do is nurture trust in you. Okay? So that's a lot. And it's stuff I honestly want you guys to think about this. The more you read this, the more you look at it, so that you get a good sense. Now I want you to listen to Otto. This is a short thing about how he talks about this. So mute yourselves.
Tool in that leadership technology is yourself, is your capacity to move on from the current self, the small s self, to the capital S self. So the most important tool in that new leadership technology is your capacity to access your authentic self. And as we said last time, the essence of presencing really is to investigate that space, the space of nothingness between the small s self and the capital S self, defined as our highest future possibility. And usually kind of these two selves are not very well connected. And what presencing helps us to do is to make these two aspects of our deeper self listening to one another. So that's number 4. The most important tool of this leadership technology is your capacity to access your authentic self. Number 5, whenever with we, I mean us as human systems, as individuals, as groups, as or even kind of as civilizations on a larger scale. If we face disruptive challenges, kind of that life and work puts in front of us, if we discuss the disruptive challenges, the ecological, the economical, the social, and so forth. So if we as humans face disruptive challenges in our environment, there are 2 different ways how we can respond. The first way to respond to that is this. This way of responding is actually going through this process of presencing. And the second way of responding to the same situation would be to go through a process of absencing that I'm going to briefly indicate here. Absencing basically means that we stay in this mode. We stay in the mode of downloading. So when I'm facing a new situation that really requires me to see with fresh eyes, to really attend, to access my open mind, to see what's going on, and yet all I can do is to look at that situation through my old frameworks. What is it that I'm doing? I'm not moving into the cognitive space of seeing, but I am moving into the cognitive space of blinding myself, right? It's not seeing, it's blinding. So I hold on to the downloading, and that really means I'm blinding myself. If I'm in a situation, kind of like you in the empathy walk or in some other situation, where life is asking you, where the challenges in front of you are asking you to move into sensing, to access this source and intelligence and to connect with the situation that you're facing on a deeper way, and you hold on to downloading, what is it that happens? You are thrown into anti-space, into a space of that can be called desensing. Desensing is that I am unable to put myself into these shoes of the others. I'm kind of stuck. I'm entrenched. Desensing could be also, I'm entrenching myself into the old collective space that I'm inhabiting, and I'm unable to to come out of my own trenches and look at the situation through another pairs of eyes. And if I am like we heard in the situation here, if I'm in a situation where life is asking me to let go and to connect with, this deeper space of presencing and self, and yet all I can do is kind of to hold on to the old patterns of self, the old patterns of intention and will. What happens is that I am thrown into a space that could be called absence. All right, so what is the essence? If you look at this and ask yourself, okay, what is the essence here of really this blinding? The essence of that is, rather than accessing your open mind, you have one truth, right? You hold on to the old truth. You're not open to seeing it in a new way. And then, as you move here, what is the essence of the desensing? It is not doing this, but which is accessing kind of a different, moving across the boundaries, but it is being stuck in one collective. So here you're stuck in one truth. Here you're stuck in one collective skin. One collective skin that, puts you into, that disables you to move outside of that collective skin and connect with other collectives. And then on the third level, the level of open will, if you're holding on, if you're rigid, if you're freezing, if you move into a freeze reaction rather than letting go, you're freezing here. What is that? It's kind of getting stuck in one self, which is the old self, and one kind of will and intention, which is the old intention. So if we look at that phenomenon, one truth, one collective, and one self, that's what we call fundamentalism. So that phenomenon is called fundamentalism. And fundamentalism, of course, is a key phenomenon we see around the world as part of the current changes. So what we see in the world, what we see outside and within our communities is both a significant opening along the lines of, the seeing and sensing and connecting to the deeper sources of what is wanting to emerge. And yet, at the same time, the same challenges also trigger, in other parts of our human system here, these types of responses of, blinding, desensing, absencing, where we get stuck in one truth, in one us, one collective, and one old self. And if you take any kind of human system on any level, and you do these two things. So when you look at what essentially is blinding and desensing? Blinding and desensing is essentially cutting off the horizontal connection. Because the essence of seeing and sensing is that you really connect with what is out there, with your mind, with your heart. If you cut that off, you get the result is stuck in one truth, stuck in one collective. So that's kind of all kind of propaganda machines. If you want to create a war machine, then of course the first thing you do is in your propaganda, you dehumanize the other, right? That is exactly what's happening here. The desensing is dehumanizing the other so that you can, it's not one of us, and that's why you can apply different standards. And then the ad-sensing really is essentially about cutting the connection here, cutting the connection between the current and the emerging future self. So, and the result is you're stuck in this little thing and unable to connect to here. So that's what ad-sensing is. You could say, if you do that to any kind of human system, you cut the horizontal connection, and then you cut the vertical connection. What's the result? The result is that you have robots, basically. You have robots, you have that you can freeze into all types of behavior that you even can reprogram if you kind of move into that space over there.
So hopefully, you know, that helped to reinforce some of the things that what we were talking about. And again, you know, what he shows is basically, you know, what are the mechanisms to move us towards the future, and what are the mechanisms that don't? And so what I want to do is just this last slide. And this comes on page 289. What to do is that you need to understand those levels of listening. So, you know, from downloading to debate. And when you look at level 2, the stage of debate is now you're starting, at least debate brings you to you know, stating the differences that we might have. Now, the problem with debate is that there's going to be a winner and loser in relationship to that. But then what happens in level 3 is that sharing and listening to each other. It's personal connection. It's going across that horizontal that he talks about. It's connecting. And so the mechanism then of conversation really is dialogue. And it's inquiry. An inquiry is thinking together. Help me understand what you're thinking. I did not realize that. That's interesting to know. That's what dialogue does. And then finally, when you get into really that level 4, the stage 4 generative, really now you've gotten to the source. So again, when you lose the sense of time, when the conversation just flows, what you begin to really experience there is what's called authentic listening to each other. The dialogue is now moving into attending to a deeper space in terms of the conversation, but the end product then is collective presencing, connecting to source. There's this creative flow. So this is, you know, what I, you know, want you to kind of mull over in your minds as you think about it on several levels. On the macro level, you know, what's going on, you know, in the larger world itself right now using this framework. Secondly, what's going on inside of my own organization as I think about my organization. But the real area is what's going on inside of me. Where am I? So that as he says, the small s self versus the large s self is what becomes important. And the more you get a sense of what that is, the stronger your leadership source of who you are will emerge. So that's basically, you know, what I want you to look at and to think about over the next couple of weeks, you know, as we come towards the end of the course. But I also want you to use this to reflect upon what your conversations are or have been in terms of your interview process. So, any comments, questions, thoughts, or anything before we wrap up?
I have
Yes.
two comments. The first one is, I really like the point about inquiry, because I've been in groups that think a lot of questions or inquiries can be resistance, but I try to explain to others it's not resistance, it's seeking to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I find interesting. And my other question is around absencing. So in the interview I did today, I'm just wondering, and this could be my personal bias, can this be age-related as it relates to organizations? So my interviewee basically said empathy didn't really come to later in his career, and because I was getting into regrets, and he goes, he thinks he should have helped more people, and in the beginning it was all about himself and not focusing on others as much. And he said, but later in my career, I started to understand. So I was just curious, has there been any studies or anything about age-related absencing in organizations, corporations?
I don't know if it's put that way, but what's interesting is we might call it maturation or maturity. It might be the more you become reflective in terms of yourself, which it sounds like this individual has been, that the more you can go introspectively, you can begin to understand, here's how I was then, and here's where I am now. I think that's important. I think the other thing that relates to that is, and particularly when you read those 2 articles that I gave you, if you want to, he talks about, the difference right now that's age-related to the perception of generations, particularly millennials versus us oldies here, et cetera, in our perceptions and how we look at those things. So I don't know if that answers it directly, but I think, yeah, there are age-related. I look at younger people today, and I find it interesting on how they perceive the world. It is much different than when I was perceiving it. I grew up during the Vietnam era, and I'm telling you, that was, the 60s, crazy time. But I think back to my conversations with my parents and my uncles and other people that, it's just that, I see the commonality that, yes, youth has certain advantages in terms of pushing forward, whereas as you get older, you become more reflective. So, yeah, I think, and there is research on that. Adult learning research particularly looks at that quite a bit. So I don't know if that helps.
That does. That's a great point about the maturation. And I asked him, what was the impetus that first made him become self-reflective? And it was actually a series of layoffs when people that he was close to were losing their jobs. So I like what you said, that it could be age-related, but it could also be circumstantial or situational.
Yeah.
So it's really individual, but that's very helpful.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you.
Okay. So anything else for the good of the order? Other questions, comments? A lot here to think about. You do have all the slides. The video, I can put that video up if you want to see, or you can go out to YouTube. Basically, I get a lot of these off of YouTube, but Otto's got a lot of his stuff out there, so you can look at them on the absencing one in those 2 articles. But those 2 articles are really, really interesting right now, and that's why I threw them up there. And again, I just want to say, I'm not putting them up there as a political statement. I'm just saying that it's an interesting way of using what you're learning in the context of what's going on in the country, whether you're conservative, liberal, independent, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is how does this play out in understanding what's happening, both at home and in the world in general. So if there are no other questions, I am going to stop the recording at this point. And then, as I said, if you